So I've been thinking about the yeast of the Pharisees and what that means. In Exodus, I was reading Exodus 12 and 13, talking about the Passover and the fact that the Israelites had to eat unleavened or unyeasted bread, so to speak. And it's been said that the yeast represents sin, and so they had to leave that out. They had to keep the sin out of their lives. Yeast repeatedly represents sin in the New Testament. But Jesus says, beware the yeast of the Pharisees. What particularly is the yeast of the Pharisees? And, I mean, it's sin, but what is that sin? What is the sin that they brought? And, well, they were the ones who were supposed to be the knowledgeable ones, the strict, learned sect of Judaism, of teachers of the law. They were the elite, very conservative leaders in the Jewish temple and the synagogues. And so Jesus attacks them for misrepresenting what God's word says to the people. For holding the people to a standard that's way above and beyond anything that God had intended when He gave the law. And I've described it as it's almost as if it reminds me of the barriers around a volcano in Hawaii that I visited as a kid. And you can't get close enough to actually see the volcano, like down inside of it, because the ground is always kind of falling away. And so they set the barrier like, 20, 30, 40 yards back, and you kind of get up to it and you're like, oh, come on, I mean, I'm not anywhere near this thing. I could totally jump over this and run around on the other side of the barrier and not be anywhere near the edge of this. But they don't want you anywhere near the possibility of falling into the volcano, because that would be really bad. So they set the barrier way back so you can't get to it. So there's no chance that you might even accidentally fall in. And that's kind of what the Pharisees did. They overdid it. They set the line way, way, way back so that nobody would even come close to the possibility of breaching the actual law if they followed the way the Pharisees presented things. Where they messed up with that, I mean, I can see where the intentions were originally good with that. Where they really messed it up was in the execution of that and the implementation of that attitude. They actually lost track of what was actually the law and what was their preventative measure for keeping people from possibly breaking the law. And so what they had done was they had taken the law, which was like this, and they'd bloated it into this huge thing. They'd added all their stuff that made it big and unmanageable and more than it should have been. It's kind of like adding yeast to bread. Bread without yeast is very flat. You add yeast to it and it gets bigger. So I think that was the yeast of the Pharisees. They added human flesh, brokenness, sin into the equation of God's law. And they bloated it into something that was completely unmanageable. I don't think that's the only interpretation of yeast, and possibly not even of the yeast of the Pharisees, but I think that covers it pretty well as far as that particular instance is concerned. And those are my thoughts on the yeast of the Pharisees.